I had always thought that old age was not a season, but a special state of mind. But in my 68 years, I have begun to realize that it is also a loneliness that comes as stealthily as the autumn fog that envelops Coralville every morning in September. My name is Prudence Edmunds. It's been 2 years since I buried my husband Douglas. 38 years of marriage is no joke. When you live with someone for that long, their habits become yours, and their absence feels like phantom pain. I still make breakfast for two. Sometimes I pour 2 cups of coffee, and it's only when the steam stops rising over the second one that I remember there's no one to drink it. In the mornings, I still wait for the sound of the water in the bathroom and the creak of the floorboards under his heavy footsteps. Douglas was a construction site inspector, not an elite profession, but he was proud that people lived in safe homes because of his work. We were never rich, but we weren't poor either. Our house on Oak Street, a small 2-story house with a porch, was paid for before Fenton turned 10. Fenton is our only son, the only child we managed to conceive after 5 years of trying and 3 miscarriages. Maybe that's why we spoiled him too much. Douglas always said a boy should have the best of everything: college, internships, a car for his 18th birthday. We worked overtime, saved up, denied ourselves a lot of things so that Fenton would get a better education than we did. And here's the result. Our son is an information security specialist for a major insurance company, married to a woman who looks at me like I'm dirt under her shoes from a designer whose name I can't even pronounce. Indela. The name itself sounds pretentious. The first time I met her, I thought it was fictitious. Turns out her parents actually decided to give her such an unusual name. It means rare flower in Sanskrit, she explained with a look like I was obliged to know it. Indela works as a social program coordinator in the city government, a title that, as far as I could tell, hides behind organizing cocktail parties and taking calls from disgruntled citizens. But she talks about it like she runs at least the United Nations. I remember the first time Fenton brought her to our house for dinner. She looked around our house with ill-concealed contempt. Her gaze slid over the pictures on the walls, the furniture Douglas and I had bought back in the early 90s, the curtains I had sewn myself. She barely touched the roast I'd been working on all day, citing her special diet. "Charming," she said then, looking around the living room. "It's so authentic. It's back in vogue now, you know? Vintage style." Our furniture wasn't vintage. It was just old but sturdy and comfortable. It's been 5 years since then. Fenton and Indela were married 6 months after they first met, and each year the gulf between us grew deeper. My son's visits became infrequent, his phone calls short and formal. Indela almost never came to see me, preferring to send Fenton alone or finding reasons why they couldn't come together. After Douglas died, things got even worse. At the funeral, Indela wore a black dress that would have been more appropriate for a cocktail party than for saying goodbye to a person. She hurried Fenton along, glancing at her watch. She had an important appointment that day, you see. "Mom understands," Fenton told me, squeezing my shoulders. "Doesn't she, Mom?" And I nodded because I didn't have the energy for conflict with my son at my husband's funeral. After Douglas died, there was an insurance policy. Not a huge sum, but enough to keep me comfortable for a few years. Most widows my age would have invested that money in securities or deposited it. But I was never like most. All my life, I worked as an accountant for a small logistics company. Numbers, reports, balance sheets were my thing. I've seen how money moves, how it works, how it creates new money with the right approach. So when my longtime client Oliver Britton mentioned that he wanted to sell his downtown restaurant, the Old Maple, I saw an opportunity. The restaurant wasn't making Oliver a profit, not because it was bad, but because Oliver was completely clueless about finances. I analyzed his books for 3 years and realized that if managed properly, the place could be very profitable. "Are you serious, Prudence?" Oliver asked me when I offered him the deal. "At your age? After everything that's happened?" "Exactly because at my age and after everything that's happened," I replied. "I need something to fill my days, Oliver. And I believe in this restaurant. We made a deal. I became the owner of the Old Maple. It was a decision I made on my own without consulting anyone." Fenton found out I'd done something with the insurance money, but I didn't tell him the details. He was too busy with his life to be interested in the details. "I hope you didn't spend it all on something stupid," he said during one of the rare calls. I assured him I was fine and changed the subject. The first few months of owning the restaurant were tough. I worked hard. I revamped the menu with the help of talented chef Elias Trent, whom I had poached from another establishment, changed the accounting system, and sourced better products. The results did not wait long. Within 6 months, Old Maple became one of the most popular restaurants in Coralville, known for its cozy atmosphere and excellent food. I didn't advertise my ownership of the restaurant. To customers and most of the staff, I was just an elderly lady who occasionally stopped in for tea and a chat with the manager. Only Elias, manager Raymond, and the bookkeeper knew that I was the one signing their checks. This secrecy gave me a strange satisfaction. In a world where I was increasingly considered invisible, an older woman who could be overlooked in line, not listened to in conversation, I had a power that no one suspected. I rarely thought about how Douglas felt about my career as an accountant. He was proud of me, but sometimes joked that I took the numbers too seriously. "Life is not a ledger, Prudy," he used to say. "Not everything can be calculated and balanced." He was right. But now that he's gone, I've realized that it's that ability to calculate and plan that keeps me afloat. My new life took on a certain rhythm. Mornings were spent doing chores, then driving to the restaurant, checking reports, communicating with the staff, sometimes helping with purchasing or planning special events. Evenings were spent at home reading or watching old movies that Douglas and I loved. Once a week, I played bridge with a group of elderly ladies from the neighborhood, the only social activity I allowed myself. Fenton called about once a month, the conversations short and perfunctory. "How are you, Mom? Everything okay? Need anything?" I always replied that I was fine, didn't need anything, no worries. Sometimes I wanted to tell him the truth, that I was lonely, that I missed the times when we were a family, that I could feel him growing more distant every day. But I kept silent. Pride? Perhaps. Or just the realization that some bridges can no longer be rebuilt. Sometimes I thought about how Fenton had changed since meeting Indela. My boy was always sensitive, attentive. He could spend hours listening to Douglas's stories about construction sites or my stories about complicated accounting transactions. He helped neighbors without expecting thanks and always stood for justice. But Indela changed him. Under her influence, he became more calculating, more cynical. He started talking about status, about connections, about the importance of being in the right circle. His concern for justice was replaced by a concern for his career. He spoke less and less of old friends and more of new acquaintances from the Indela world, people with prestigious positions and the right last names. I remember the day I first truly saw these changes. Fenton and I were sitting on the veranda. Douglas was still alive but lying in the hospital after his first heart attack. Fenton had come alone. Indela was at some important event. "Papa was always so stubborn," he said, looking at the garden that Douglas had lovingly cultivated for years. "If he had taken care of his health like I told him, this wouldn't have happened." "Your father always lived life to the fullest," I objected. "He didn't want to spend his days counting calories and taking blood pressure." "And this is the result," Fenton said with a chuckle. "It's a good thing he had decent insurance. Treatment's expensive." I looked at my son back then and I didn't recognize him. When did he start measuring his father's life by money? When did he forget that Douglas worked 2 jobs to pay for his college? When did he think he had the right to judge the man who gave him everything? I didn't say anything. I stayed silent, as I'd done too often in recent years. Maybe that was my fault. Maybe I should have told my son the truth more often instead of trying to keep the peace at all costs. Douglas died 6 months after that conversation. A second heart attack proved fatal. The doctors said it was too strong. His heart just couldn't take it. How ironic. His strength had become his weakness. At the funeral, Fenton kept a low profile. He made the proper speech about what a good father Douglas had been, how much he had taught him, how much he would be missed. The words sounded right, but I couldn't feel the sincerity in them. It was like a son doing a duty, not saying goodbye to his father. After the funeral, life moved on. I learned to live alone. I learned not to expect calls from my son, not to rely on his visits. I focused on the restaurant, and it saved me from the depression that waited around every corner in an empty house. The Old Maple became my outlet, I would go there early in the morning when the cooks were just starting work and leave late at night when the last customers had finished their coffee. I knew every employee by name, knew their stories, their problems, and their joys. They became like a family to me, the family I no longer had. I became especially close to Elias. This 30-year-old chef, with an innate talent for cooking, treated me with a respect I hadn't seen from my own son in a long time. He would consult with me about the menu, tell me about new culinary trends, sometimes even ask me about personal problems. I knew that he had recently broken up with his girlfriend, that his mother had diabetes and lived in another state, that he dreamed of opening his own restaurant someday. "You're my inspiration, Mrs. Edmunds," he said one day as we sat in an empty auditorium after closing time. "If you were able to start a new business at your age, then I can take a chance on you when the time comes." I didn't tell him that my risk had been carefully calculated, that I had studied every possible scenario before investing in the restaurant, but his words warmed my soul. It's nice to know that someone sees you not just as an old woman, but as someone capable of decisive action. The day the dinner invitation arrived, I was sitting in my office in the back of the restaurant. It wasn't a letter or a card, but a messenger message from Fenton. "Mom, Indela and I would like to invite you to dinner this Friday. 5 years since our wedding anniversary. Old Maple Restaurant, 7 p.m. The reservation is under the name of Edmunds. Confirm you're coming." I stared at the phone screen and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Of all the restaurants in town, they'd chosen mine, and they didn't even know it. My first inclination was to write something like, "Oh, what a coincidence. I just happen to own this place." But something stopped me. Maybe it was the fatigue of constantly trying to get along with my son and daughter-in-law, who seemed to be just waiting for an excuse to express their disapproval of my life. I decided that I would attend this dinner without saying anything about my situation. We'll see how events unfold. After all, it was their holiday, and I didn't want to overshadow it. Yet. "Thank you for the invitation, son. Of course I'll be there. Congratulations to you," I wrote back. I then called Raymond, my property manager, and alerted him to the situation. "On Friday, my son and his wife will be having dinner at our place. The reservation is under the name of Edmunds. They don't know I own the restaurant, and I'd like to keep it that way for the time being." "I understand, Mrs. Edmunds," Raymond replied. "We'll treat you as an ordinary guest." But may I ask why the secrecy? I wondered. Why didn't I want them to know? Maybe because I'd anticipated their reaction. Indela's condescending surprise, Fenton's awkwardness. Or maybe it was because I knew Indela would find a way to ruin even this small victory of mine, to make it seem insignificant or even ridiculous. "It just happened," I said at last. "Family matters are always complicated, Raymond. You'll understand when your children are grown." Raymond nodded. He had a teenage son himself, and he'd probably experienced the first signs of the estrangement that often occurred between parents and children. "The table will be ready," he assured me, "and the staff would be briefed." I thanked him and went back to work. But thoughts of the upcoming dinner didn't leave me. I imagined various scenarios, replayed possible dialogues in my mind. What would Indela say when I met her? What remark would she come up with this time to let me know that I didn't fit into their life? The last time we saw each other, it was Christmas 6 months ago. She remarked that my sweater was so cute, retro, and then asked if I'd like her to set up a consultation with a stylist for me. I have a friend who specializes in working with older clients. She helps them look age-appropriate but stylish. Fenton was silent then, only casting a quick glance at his wife that I couldn't decipher. Was it a reproach or a tacit agreement with her assessment? I declined the stylist's help as politely as possible, though I was seething inside. Indela shrugged. "Suit yourself. Just wanted to help." Her tone clearly said, "See, I'm trying to be kind and you don't appreciate it." After that meeting, I decided I would no longer settle for family holidays. Christmas, Thanksgiving, birthdays, all of these would now go on without me. Let Fenton and Indela enjoy their perfect life, with no room for an aging mother with unfashionable clothes and outdated attitudes. And now this dinner invitation. Why did they suddenly decide to include me in their anniversary celebration? Did Fenton feel a prick of conscience after all? Or was Indela up to something I had no idea about? Whatever it was, I decided to go. And not just go. I decided to look as good as I could at my age. Let Indela choke on her advice about stylists. The next day I went shopping, a thing I hadn't done in a very long time. I usually ordered clothes online, choosing simple, practical things. But now I wanted something special. There weren't many good stores in the Coralville Mall, but I was lucky enough to find a dress that fit me perfectly. Dark blue with long sleeves and an elegant neckline, it emphasized what was still worth emphasizing and hid what was better hidden. The saleswoman, a woman about my age, nodded approvingly when I came out of the fitting room. "It suits you very well," she said. "It looks good with silver jewelry." I had a silver sapphire necklace that Douglas had given me for our 30th wedding anniversary. I rarely wore it. It was too expensive, too special. But now was probably the right time. I bought a dress, low-heeled shoes, even a new purse. I spent more than I usually spent on clothes, but I figured I could afford it. After all, the restaurant was making a good profit and my daily expenses were minimal. On the way home, I thought about how Indela would react when she saw me in my new outfit. She'd probably find something to pick on. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't care. I wasn't buying this dress for her. I was buying it for me. At home, I hung my purchases in the closet and decided I still needed to do my hair. My gray hair had long since grown out and looked unkempt. I made an appointment with the hairdresser for Thursday, the day before dinner. I spent the rest of the days before the meeting in my usual preoccupations. The restaurant needed attention. We were preparing for a fall menu update, and Elias had some interesting ideas to discuss. In addition, one of the vendors had raised their prices, and I was looking for alternatives. Wednesday night, I got a call from Fenton. A rare occasion, he usually preferred to text. "Mom, are you sure you're coming on Friday?" he asked without preamble. "Of course, son. I already bought a new dress," I replied, trying to keep my voice lighthearted. "Good," he said quietly. "Look, Indela is a little nervous. You know how she is about important dates. Everything has to be perfect." "I'll try not to spoil her perfect evening," I said, unable to contain my sarcasm. "Mom," he sounded annoyed. "Let's not do this, okay? I just want the evening to go well. No pressure." I sighed. It's always the same. Fenton wants everything to go smoothly, but he expects only me to make concessions. Never Indela. "All right, son. I'll be on my best behavior," I promised. "And congratulations again. 5 years is a serious date." "Thanks, Mom." His voice softened a little. "I'll see you on Friday." After the conversation, I sat in the chair for a long time, looking at the pictures on the mantel. Douglas and Fenton on a fishing trip when my son was about 10. Fenton in his graduation suit in front of the college. Our family photo, taken the year before Douglas died, is the last time we were truly happy together. How did we get to this point? When did my son start looking at me through his wife's eyes? When did I stop being a mom and become an inconvenient responsibility? I didn't know the answers to these questions, but I did know one thing. Friday would be the day something changed. Maybe it would be the end of the shaky construct that Fenton and I called a relationship, or maybe it would be the beginning of something new. Either way, I was ready. On Thursday, I went to the hairdresser. Mrs. Paul, a lovely woman who'd cut my hair for years, was surprised when I asked not just for a trim as usual, but a real haircut. "Special occasion?" she asked, going through my gray strands. "You could say that," I smiled. "Dinner with my son and daughter-in-law." "Oh, how nice," Mrs. Paul said. "Family gatherings are always so important." I didn't try to dissuade her. Why let a stranger in on the complexities of my relationship with my son? When my hair was done, I didn't recognize myself in the mirror. Mrs. Paul had arranged my hair in an elegant but not overly elaborate style that made my face look more open, accentuating my cheekbones and eyes. "It looks great on you," she said, turning my chair so I could see the result from all angles. "You look at least 10 years younger." I wasn't sure about 10 years, but I looked really good. Suddenly, I realized that I was looking forward to Friday night's dinner not with anxiety, but with some strange anticipation. The day before dinner was unusually hectic. In the morning, I stopped by the restaurant to check orders and sign some papers. Raymond, my manager, caught me at the entrance to the office. "Mrs. Edmunds, about tomorrow night. I will personally see to it that everything goes perfectly. Your son's table is already reserved in the far corner." overlooking the garden, just the way you like it. Thank you, Raymond, I nodded. Just please don't give me away early. No special privileges, no hint of who I am. He smiled understandingly. Of course, you'll be just another guest. But, let me ask you, are you sure this is a good idea? Hiding from your son that you own a restaurant? I sighed. Raymond was right. The whole secret thing did seem a little childish. But every time I pictured Indela's face as she learned the truth, I felt grim satisfaction. I'm not hiding it on purpose, Raymond. It just happened. Fenton never took much interest in my affairs after his father died. And when I hinted that I was doing something new, he just dismissed it as the whims of a bored old woman. Raymond nodded understandingly. He was in his early 40s, and he himself had a difficult relationship with his parents. He often said that working with me helped him understand his mother better. Well, tomorrow will be an interesting evening, he said. Elias is preparing a special menu, by the way. Nothing extravagant, but he wants you to be proud of the cuisine. I am proud, I smiled. Tell him it's nothing special. Let it be business as usual. I left the restaurant and went to the beauty parlor. I usually did my own manicures, but today I decided to treat myself. The technician, a young woman with bright pink hair and kind eyes, suggested a few shades. Something neutral? I asked. I didn't want to attract attention. You have beautiful hands, she said, working on my nails. But you don't show them. You hide your fingers all the time as if you were embarrassed. I looked at my hands in surprise. Indeed, in recent years, I'd gotten into the habit of keeping them crossed or in my pockets. Especially around Indela, who always showed off her impeccable manicure and expensive rings. It started at one of the first family dinners when Fenton first introduced us. We were sitting in a restaurant. Not mine, I was still working as an accountant at the time, and I was gesticulating while telling some story. Indela suddenly interrupted me. Oh, Prudence, you should try paraffin hand baths. They work wonders on mature skin. My mom had those, age spots. I half-worded that. My hands are the hands of a woman who's worked her whole life. Yes, they had spots, and the skin wasn't as firm as it had been when she was younger. But Indela's voice sounded as disgusted as if my hands were contagious. Fenton coughed awkwardly. Indela just wants to help, Mom. Her mother is very self-aware. In that moment, I felt for the first time that my son had chosen a side, and it wasn't my side. After that dinner, I bought expensive hand cream and started wearing gloves even in not too cold weather. And then I got into the habit of hiding my hands. Done. The master's voice brought me back to reality. What do you think? I looked at my nails. They were covered with pale pink nail polish, neatly filed and looked well-groomed, but not flashy. Very nice, thank you. I thanked him sincerely. Wear your hands open, advised the master. They tell your story better than any words. I smiled and paid, leaving a generous tip. That girl with the pink hair had just taught me a lesson in confidence without realizing it. At home, I pulled out of my closet the dress I'd bought especially for tomorrow night's dinner. Dark blue had always been my color. Douglas had said it emphasized the color of my eyes, made them look like deep lakes. Such trite but nice compliments. I missed them so much. Trying on the dress, I remembered the last time I dressed up for a family dinner. It was Christmas 2 years ago. Fenton had unexpectedly invited me to their house. Indela was against it. That much I knew for sure. My son had blurted it out during a phone call. But darling, it's my mother. It's just one night. His voice sounded pleading. I came, dressed up and with gifts. Indela met me at the door with a strained smile. Their house was impeccably decorated, like the cover of a magazine, but completely lifeless. No children's drawings of Santa Claus, no homemade jewelry, and none of those odd and ridiculous trinkets that accumulate in families over the years and become part of tradition. During dinner, Indela talked incessantly about her work, about important people she was meeting, about plans for a vacation in Europe. Fenton looked at her with adoration, occasionally inserting brief comments. They hardly noticed me until I myself asked a question about their plans for the children. There was an awkward silence. Then Indela answered dryly, We're not planning children, Prudence. At least not for the next 5 to 7 years. Career first, then everything else. But you're both in your 30s, I said cautiously. Time is ticking. Mom, Fenton's voice sounded warning. It's our decision. Of course, I agreed quickly. I just thought, exactly, Indela interrupted with a smile that didn't affect her eyes. You thought, and we decided. There's a difference, isn't there? I felt myself blush with humiliation. Fenton didn't intervene again. He studied his plate with such interest as if the secrets of the universe were written there. After dinner, Indela suggested we play a board game. She chose something complicated with many rules which she explained in cursive. I kept getting it wrong, and Indela sighed each time with deliberate patience. Let me explain it again, Prudence. Very slowly, she said, as if she were talking to a child or someone with mental problems. I couldn't stand it. I'm not stupid, Indela. I just haven't played this game before. Of course you're not stupid. Her smile became even more condescending. It's just that some people have a harder time learning new skills as they get older. It's a scientific fact. Fenton coughed. Shall we have some tea? Mom, do you want tea? Typical Fenton, avoiding conflict at all costs. I nodded, swallowing my resentment. Tea came in the dainty cups I'd given them for the housewarming party. At least they'd used them instead of hiding them away. When I left, Fenton walked me to the cab. He looked guilty but didn't say anything about Indela's behavior. Just gave me a hug and mumbled, "Thanks for coming, Mom." It was good. It wasn't. It wasn't good, and we both knew it. But I just nodded and got in the car. Looking out the window at the receding figure of my son, I realized I wouldn't be coming to their house again. And maybe it was my fault. I hadn't fostered self-respect in my son, hadn't taught him to stand up for what was right. Douglas was a kind but gentle father. And me. I was always giving in, always compromising. And this is the result. 2 years have passed since then. We met rarely and always in public places. Fenton called occasionally, but our conversations became shorter and more formal. I knew he felt guilty, but not guilty enough to make a difference. I hung the dress back in the closet and walked over to the dressing table. On it was a jewelry box. Few, but dear to me. I opened it and pulled out the silver sapphire necklace Douglas had given me for our 30th anniversary. It would go perfectly with the dress. As I tried it on in front of the mirror, I remembered when Douglas had handed me that box. We were sitting in a restaurant, not too expensive, but cozy. He was nervous, like a teenager on a first date, and kept checking his jacket pocket for the gift. "Prudy," he said, using my pet name that only those closest to me knew. 30 years ago, I promised to love you forever. And you know what? I kept that promise. I cried right there at the table. Not because of the necklace, although it was beautiful and cost more than we usually spend on gifts, but because of those simple words spoken with such sincerity. Indela calls such displays of affection trite and melodramatic. She prefers rational relationships based on a mutually beneficial partnership. That's what she said at that ill-fated Christmas meeting. I wondered then, is my son really happy in such a rational relationship? Doesn't he crave simple, sincere words of love? I put the necklace back in its box. Tomorrow would be a big day, and I needed sleep. But sleep wouldn't come. I lay staring at the ceiling, thinking about dinner. What would I say to Indela if she started her barbs again? How would I react if Fenton remained silent again, letting her humiliate me? How much longer will I put up with this for the illusion of a family relationship? Maybe it's time to just let go, to recognize that my son has grown up and chosen his own path, even if that path leads him away from me. Maybe the kindest thing I can do for him is to relieve him of his sense of obligation, of the need to call occasionally and invite him to dinners that bring no joy to anyone. The thought was painful, but it had its truth. I got out of bed and walked to the window. Coralville was quiet at night. Only sparse lights burned in the windows of the neighboring houses. Somewhere out there live families, happy and not so happy, whole and broken, loving and hurting. Ordinary people with their ordinary problems. I remembered how once, before Fenton was married, we had talked to him about my mother. She was a complicated person, demanding and often unfair. We rarely spoke to each other in the last years of her life. "Don't you have any regrets, Mother?" Fenton asked then. "That you weren't closer to her?" "Sometimes I do," I answered honestly. "But relationships are always a two-way road. You can't go it alone no matter how much you want to. I'll never keep my distance from you. my son promised then, squeezing my hand. Never. And that's where we are now, the irony of fate. I went back to bed and did fall asleep, but my sleep was restless. I dreamt of Douglas, trying to tell me something, but I couldn't make out the words. I woke up with a sense of loss and a firm resolve. Tonight I would be me. I won't try to please Indela. I won't keep quiet if she oversteps her bounds. And yes, I will tell them about the restaurant, but only when I decide it's time. Friday morning began with rain, a fine drizzling rain, typical of September in our area. I made coffee and sat by the window, watching the drops drip down the glass. In this kind of weather, one feels especially lonely. I thought about how my life had changed in the last 2 years. After Douglas died, I was sure I would just live out the rest of my days buried in memories and regrets. But instead, I've become a restaurant owner, made new friends among the staff, and learned things about myself that I didn't even realize before. Like that, I have business acumen and intuition, that I can make decisions that affect the well-being of others, that I am capable of starting a new chapter of life at an age when many people have already put a stop to it. Indela will never believe that old Prudence can run a successful business. She thinks I'm a relic of the past, a woman who's been an appendage to her husband all her life, and now widowed, an inconvenient liability to her son. But I'm no longer the woman Indela knew. I've changed, I've grown stronger, and today I'm going to show her that. After breakfast, I went to the restaurant. I had to check some details before the evening. Mrs. Edmunds, everything is ready for tonight. The table's reserved, the staff has been briefed. No one will give away your secret. Thank you, Raymond. I touched his arm in gratitude. You know, I've been thinking about this all night. Maybe it's time to stop hiding, time to show my son and his wife who I really am. I think it's the right thing to do. He nodded. Secrets are rarely good for family relationships. It's not just about secrets, I sighed. It's about respect. They don't respect me. Maybe when they hear about the restaurant, they'll start to see me not as just an old woman, but as someone who can do more. Raymond looked at me doubtfully. That's not how respect works, Mrs. Edmunds. It can't be earned by accomplishments. It's either there or it's not there. He was right, of course. But I still wanted to see the look on Indela's face when she found out she was dining at her mother-in-law's restaurant. I spent several hours at the restaurant, checking the bills and discussing new items on the menu with Elias. He was thrilled with the idea of introducing seasonal pumpkin and apple dishes, a fall classic, but with original touches. Are you sure you don't want me to prepare something special for your table tonight? He asked for the umpteenth time. Absolutely sure, I replied firmly. No favors. I want them to appreciate the restaurant as it is for all diners. Leaving the restaurant, I headed home to get ready for the evening. I had a few hours to clean myself up and mentally prepare for the meeting. I took a long bath using the scented oils a coworker had once given me. For special occasions, she had said at the time. Well, today was just such an occasion. Drying myself off with a soft towel, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The body of a 68-year-old woman with sagging skin, age spots, and the marks of 2 births, one of which ended in a late-term miscarriage. Not the body they show in anti-aging cream commercials, a real body with a real story. I remembered Indela once telling me at the dinner table that she keeps herself in shape so that she doesn't turn into a shapeless mass by old age. It was a direct jab at me. I had just put on a few pounds after Douglas died. Fenton pretended not to take the hint and turned the conversation away. He was always like that, avoiding confrontation, pretending everything was all right. Just like his father, Douglas hated conflict too and preferred to smooth things over, even if it meant swallowing a grudge. I carefully applied cream to my face and body, dried my hair, and did light makeup. Nothing flashy, but enough to emphasize my eyes and hide some age spots. Indela always has flawless makeup on, even at home, even when she's sick. You can't let yourself get disheveled, she told me once, catching me without makeup. Once I was dressed, I walked to the mirror and examined myself critically. The dark blue dress fit perfectly, emphasizing what was still worth emphasizing and hiding what was better hidden. The silver sapphire necklace glistened beautifully at the neckline. I looked dignified. Not young, no, but not like the pathetic old woman Indela probably saw me as. I took a deep breath, fighting a sudden bout of uncertainty. What if everything went wrong? What if my disclosure would only make things worse? What if Fenton wasn't on my side? You're a strong woman, Prudence, I said to my reflection. You've survived the loss of your husband, started a new business, dealt with loneliness. You'll get through this too. I grabbed my purse, threw on a light coat, and walked out of the house. The rain had stopped, but the air was damp and cool. I could have walked to the restaurant. It was only a leisurely 15-minute walk. But today, I decided to take a cab. I didn't want to risk my hair or my outfit. In the car, I went over the possible scenarios for the evening. How will Indela react when she sees me? What would she say when she heard about the restaurant? Would Fenton be proud of me or embarrassed? And the biggest question of all, is it worth it? Was it worth trying to save a relationship that had probably existed only in my head for a long time? I didn't know the answers, but I was ready to find out. Tonight was going to be different, for better or for worse, and I was ready to accept either outcome. The cab stopped at the Old Maple. I paid the driver and got out, looking at the sign for my restaurant. My restaurant, my little empire that I had built on my own, without the help of my son, without the support of anyone. A place where I was respected and appreciated, not as Fenton's mother or Douglas's widow, but as Prudence Edmunds, an intelligent and capable woman. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the door and entered. The restaurant greeted me with a muffled hum of voices and soft light. Friday night is the busiest time for the Old Maple. Almost all the tables were occupied, but the atmosphere remained cozy, not noisy. This is exactly how I wanted it to be when I bought the place. The hostess, a young girl named Kira, greeted me at the entrance with a professional smile that grew warmer as she recognized me. "Good evening, Mrs. Edmunds," she said hello, but didn't call me owner as she usually did. Raymond had instructed the staff well. "Good evening, Kira. I have an appointment with the Edmunds family." "Of course, they're already here. Let me show you to their table." I followed her across the room, feeling my heart start to beat faster. From the back, I recognized Fenton at once, his slumped shoulders, the distinctive tilt of his head. He was facing the window, and across from him was Indela, flawless as ever, in her cream dress, her hair in a tight bun. They noticed me when I was a few steps away from the table. Fenton stood up, an uncertain smile appearing on his face. Indela remained seated, only nodding slightly. "Mom." Fenton hugged me, and I could smell the familiar scent of his cologne. "You look good." "Thank you, son." I patted him on the back and turned to Indela. "Hello, Indela. Congratulations on your anniversary." "Prudence." She nodded again, not even trying to get up for a greeting. "Thank you for being able to come." That "could" sounded like I'd made an incredible effort to get out of the nursing home for their party. Typical Indela. There was a hidden jab in every phrase. I sat down in the offered chair and Kira handed me a menu. "Something to drink?" she asked. "A glass of white wine, please," I replied. "Chardonnay." "We've already ordered a bottle of Cabernet," Indela intervened. "Prudence, why don't you join us? It's an excellent wine, though perhaps a little difficult for the unfamiliar palate." Another jab. It's as if I've been drinking cheap beer all my life and can't appreciate fine wine. "I prefer white," I said firmly. "But thanks for the offer." Kira nodded and walked away. There was an awkward pause. Fenton coughed. "So, how are you doing, Mom? Everything all right?" "I'm fine, thank you." I smiled at him. "I've got a lot to do and a lot to worry about. Life doesn't stop, you know." "It's wonderful that you find things to do at your age," Indela interjected. "My aunt is also very active. She's 72 and she still attends a knitting class twice a week. It's so important to maintain social connections." I ignored her comparison of me to an elderly aunt going to knitting class. "Yes, social connections are very important," I agreed neutrally. "By the way, congratulations on your 5th anniversary. It's a significant date." "Yes," Fenton took Indela's hand. 5 years have flown by." "It's a very special date for us," said Indela. "We have overcome so many difficulties together, and now we finally reached a certain status in society. Fenton's been promoted, you know. He's now in charge of the entire information security department. I'm very happy for him." I looked at my son with genuine pride. "You were always a smart boy." "A man," I corrected Indela. Fenton has been a man for a long time now, not a boy. Before I could answer, Kira came over with my wine and a basket of fresh bread. I thanked her and took a sip. The wine was just the way I liked it, dry, with a touch of citrus. So, Fenton tried to resume the conversation. Mother, have you been here long? Indela and I discovered this restaurant recently on the recommendation of a colleague. The food here is excellent. Yes, I've been here, I said casually. A few times. I like their food too. Surprisingly, Indela raised her eyebrows. It's a pretty expensive place. I didn't realize it was in your price range. Another jab. But this time I was prepared. I can afford more than you think, Indela, I replied calmly. Not all of my money goes to paying the utilities. Fenton tensed. Let's not talk about that. It's a holiday after all. Of course, Indela nodded. I don't want to spoil the evening with unpleasant talk. Like I was the one who started talking about money, not her. Typical. A waiter approached us, a young man named Brandon, one of the most experienced in our restaurant. He didn't give away by any gesture that he knew me. Ready to order? He asked. Indela took the initiative. I'll have the salmon with lime and thyme sauce, no garnish, and an arugula salad, dressing separate. I'll have a steak, medium rare, Fenton ordered. And a baked potato. I'll have the pumpkin and sage ravioli, I said. And a pear and gorgonzola salad. Brandon wrote down the orders and left. Indela immediately began to talk about her work, about the important project she was overseeing, about the people in the city government with whom she was in contact. She talked nonstop, hardly letting Fenton get a word in edgewise, and not even a single line to me, as if I didn't exist. I watched my son. He was looking at his wife with an expression that was hard to decipher. Pride? Humility? Maybe even a slight weariness. Suddenly, I felt sorry for him. Was he living the life he dreamed of? Or was he just floating along with the current Indela had created? How's your work, Fenton? I asked when Indela paused to sip her wine. Tell me more about the promotion. Well, it's not a big deal. He shrugged, but I could see he was pleased with my attention. It's just that I have 6 people under me now, and I'm in charge of the entire security of the company's network. Don't minimize your accomplishments, darling. Indela put her hand on his wrist. This is a very serious position, and a significant salary increase that will allow us to finally buy a house in that neighborhood we've been talking about. Are you planning to move? I asked. I thought your apartment was very conveniently located. It's a good place to start, Indela said. But people in our circle should live in a house of their own, in the right neighborhood, among the right neighbors. The right neighbors? I couldn't help but ask. Successful, educated, established. She said the words like an incantation. People who mean something in this town. I hope your new neighbors are as kind and helpful as ours on Oak Street, I said. Kindness is a good thing, Indela smiled indulgently. But useful connections are more important. In today's world, you have to know the right people, Prudence. Though, of course, things were different in your time. My time. It's like I lived in the time of the dinosaurs. Our salads arrived, and I was glad for a little respite. The food at the Old Maple was always excellent, a credit to Elias and his team. The salad was fresh, with the perfect balance of sour and sweet, with crunchy walnuts and creamy gorgonzola. Very tasty, I said, mostly to Brandon, who was just passing by. Not bad, Indela agreed, picking at her arugula. They do better at Azure, though. Have you ever been there, Prudence? No? It's a very exclusive place, hard to get into without a month's reservation, but we have, connections. The conversation continued in the same vein. Indela talked about her accomplishments, about important people she knows, about places I supposedly couldn't afford to visit. Fenton was silent most of the time, occasionally inserting short comments. I noticed him casting apologetic glances at me at times, but never once did he try to stop his wife or change the subject. By the time the main courses arrived, I was already feeling tired of the show. The ravioli was wonderful. Pumpkin filling with hints of nutmeg, butter, and sage sauce, a sprinkling of parmesan. I noticed that Fenton was eating his steak with gusto, but Indela barely touched her salmon. Was there something wrong with your dish? Brandon asked, noticing her untouched plate. It's a little too salty, she replied. And the sauce is too sour. But that's okay, I'm used to disappointment. Brandon offered to replace the dish, but she declined. When he left, Indela leaned toward Fenton. That's why I prefer Azure. They know how to handle food there. So what are you planning next? I asked, addressing both of them. Besides moving to a new house. We have a lot of plans, Fenton said. Maybe next year we'll go to Europe. Indela has never been to Italy, and I've always wanted to show her Florence. That's a great idea, I smiled, remembering the trip Douglas and I had taken to Italy. Florence is beautiful. You'll love the Uffizi. You've been to Italy? Indela didn't hide her surprise. When? Years ago with Douglas for our 20th anniversary. Wow! She looked almost disappointed. I didn't know you traveled. Our conversation about traveling and art gradually turned to what I was doing. Indela, clearly unhappy with my tales of past travels, decided to regain control of the conversation. What do you do to fill your days now, Prudence? Besides knitting and watching television? Fenton threw his wife a warning glance, but she ignored it. I don't knit, Indela, I replied calmly. And I don't watch television much. I have other interests. What other interests? She clearly didn't believe that I could have a full life. Different ones. I decided not to reveal my secret yet. What do you do in your free time, besides visiting exclusive places? Indela pressed her lips together. I have a very busy social life. Charity events, cultural events, networking meetings. That sounds exhausting, I said. Being on the radar all the time, meeting expectations. Not everyone finds it exhausting, she countered. Some people like to be at the center of things, not languishing in oblivion. Indela, Fenton said warningly. What? She turned to him. I'm just saying that different people have different preferences. Some like to be active, others like to sit at home and complain about the modern world. I'm not complaining about the modern world, I countered. I just don't share some of its values, like judging people by their status and connections rather than by their character and actions. That's a very nice attitude, Indela smiled indulgently. But it's not very realistic. In our circle, people understand the importance of position in society. In your circle, I repeated. And I obviously don't fit into that circle? Mother, please, Fenton looked unhappy. Let's not spoil the evening. I'm not ruining the evening, son. I just want to set the record straight. Indela obviously doesn't think I'm of sufficient status for your family. Am I right, Indela? Indela straightened up, accepting the challenge. If you insist on being frank, yes. You don't always fit the image expected of the mother of a man in Fenton's position. Your manners, your style, your attitudes are all a bit outdated. Indela! Fenton looked shocked. You can't say that. Why not? She turned to him. You yourself are always complaining that your mother doesn't understand your life, doesn't share your ambitions. Isn't that so? Fenton was silent, and that silence told me more than any words could. So that's what he really said about me. I just want to protect our family, Indela continued. Our reputation. After all, status in society is easy to lose because of inappropriate associations. Inappropriate associations, I repeated slowly. You mean I'm an inappropriate association for you? Don't twist my words. Indela sighed irritably. What I'm saying is that there are certain situations where your presence, inappropriate. Like when we're dealing with powerful people. I understand, I nodded. You'd rather I didn't interfere with your perfect life with my inappropriate presence. You'd like me to leave. Now, I didn't say that, Indela looked annoyed. But since we're having this conversation, yes, I would prefer to end the evening alone with my husband. No offense. Indela, Fenton exclaimed. You can't treat my mother like that. Why not? She turned to him. We're always going round and round. Maybe it's time to be honest. Your mother doesn't fit into our lives, Fenton. She doesn't share our values, doesn't understand our aspirations. I noticed that some people at neighboring tables were beginning to pay attention to our conversation. Brandon stood nearby, not knowing whether to intervene. You don't fit my family's status, Indela said bluntly, looking me in the eye. So please leave. The hall grew quiet. Fenton looked like he'd been punched, and I felt strangely relieved. It had finally been said out loud. Good. I nodded and raised my hand, beckoning to Raymond, who was watching the situation. He came over to us immediately. "What can I do for you, Mrs. Edmunds?" he asked. "Raymond, would you be so kind as to cancel the bill for this table?" I said calmly. "And let Elias know that his salmon was not appreciated today." Indela and Fenton looked at me in bewilderment. "Of course, Mrs. Edmunds," Raymond nodded. "Anything else?" "Yes," I stood up. "Tell these people who I am." He turned to Fenton and Indela. "Mrs. Edmunds is the owner of the Old Maple. Has been for 2 years." Indela froze with her mouth open. Fenton turned pale. "What?" he finally squeezed out. "Mom, you own this restaurant?" "That's right," I nodded. "I bought it after your father died. I put the insurance money into a profitable business." "But, how?" Indela looked completely confused. "You don't know anything about the restaurant business." "I understand finance," I replied. "And I know how to surround myself with talented people who understand the rest, like Raymond or our chef Elias." "Why didn't you say something?" Fenton looked hurt. "Did you ask?" I parried. "Did you ever take an interest in my life after my father died?" "Number, you were too busy with your career and your status." I turned to Indela. "You know what's most ironic? You chose my restaurant for your anniversary, of all the places in town. Maybe you should think about what that means." There was a tense silence in the Old Maple room. The patrons at the neighboring tables were careful to pretend they couldn't hear our conversation, but I could feel their gazes. Indela sat frozen like a statue with an expression of absolute shock on her face. Her perfectly styled hair seemed to be frozen as well, afraid to move. Fenton looked confused, his eyes darting between me and his wife, as if he couldn't decide which side to take. "Do you, own this restaurant?" Indela finally squeezed out, as if checking to see if she'd misheard. "Is this some kind of joke?" "No, it's not a joke," I remained calm, though my emotions raged inside. "I bought the Old Maple from the previous owner, Oliver Britton, 2 years ago, shortly after Douglas died." "But why didn't you tell us?" Fenton finally found his voice. I heard resentment in his tone, as if I were the one who had kept something important from him, not he who had ignored my life for years. "Did you ask?" I answered question for question. "Did you ever wonder what I do? How I spend my days? What I live on?" "No, Fenton. You were too busy with your new life, your status." Raymond delicately retreated a few steps, but remained in sight, ready to intervene if things got out of hand. I appreciated his support. "It's not fair, Mom." Fenton shook his head. "I've been calling, asking how you're doing." "How are you doing, Mom?" "Everything okay?" "Well, okay, I gotta go." I mimicked his normal phone conversation with me. "That's not interest, Fenton, it's a formality." Indela seemed to be starting to come around. She straightened up, fixed her hair, and said with a strained smile, "Well, this is unexpected and impressive, I must admit. I didn't think you were capable of such a business project." She still sounded incredulous, as if she expected me to admit to a prank. "A lot of people underestimate older people, Indela," I replied. "They think that as we age, we lose not only our physical strength, but also our mental abilities. That we are no longer able to learn, to develop, to start something new. It's a prejudice that has nothing to do with reality." Fenton looked at me as if he were seeing me for the first time. Maybe he was. Maybe for years he hadn't seen me. But the image he'd created in his head of a helpless old woman in need of indulgence and care. "One thing I don't understand," he continued after a pause. "Why did you have to hide it from us? Why didn't you brag about your success?" I grinned bitterly. "Brag? Fenton, I'm not a 5-year-old who drew a picture and ran to show it to his parents. I'm a grown woman who made a business decision and implemented it successfully. I don't need approval or a pat on the shoulder." "But we are a family." He looked genuinely puzzled. "A family shares important news." "Family?" I shook my head. "Fenton, we haven't been a real family since you got married. Maybe even before that. We were people related by blood, who occasionally met on holidays and exchanged meaningless phrases." Indela glanced at her watch, and I realized that she was anxious to get out of the restaurant, away from this awkward situation. But I didn't have everything to say yet. "You know what really surprises me?" I looked around at both of them. "That you chose my restaurant for your anniversary. Of all the places in Coralville you came here, maybe somewhere deep down inside you feel a connection to me, even though you don't want to admit it. It's just a coincidence, Indela said hastily. This place was recommended to me in the office. I had no idea. Of course, I nodded. Coincidence, or fate, whatever you prefer. Fenton looked more and more unhappy. He'd always hated conflict, always tried to smooth things over, to find a compromise. But in this situation, compromise was impossible. Too much had been said. Too many resentments had accumulated over the years. Mom, he tried to take my hand, but I gently pulled away. I know we haven't been close enough lately, and I regret that, I really do. But we can make it up to you. Now that we know about your restaurant, we can see each other more often, socialize more. Now that you know I own a successful business, am I suddenly worthy of your attention? I shook my head. Fenton, this isn't about the restaurant. It's about respect, acceptance. It's about love, after all, don't you see? He lowered his eyes. I've always loved you, Mom. It's just life is complicated. We all have our obligations, our priorities. And I've never been on your priority list, I finished for him. At least not in recent years. Indela seemed to have decided to change tactics. Her face took on an expression of professional benevolence that she probably used at formal events. Prudence, I think we've all been overreacting a little, she said in a conciliatory tone. Said things we didn't mean. Let's forget this unpleasant moment and start again. Why don't you show us around the restaurant? Tell us how you've been so successful. I gave her a long look. Did she really think I'd believe in this sudden change? That I'd forget all the humiliation she'd subjected me to over the years? All those moments when Fenton was silent letting her do it? I don't think that's a good idea, I finally answered. The evening was already ruined, and no tour of the kitchen was going to save it. But Mother, Fenton began. No. I shook my head. I'm tired, Fenton. Tired of pretending everything's all right when it isn't. Tired of pretending I'm not affected by your attitude. Tired of being invisible in my own son's life. I got up from the table. My legs were shaking slightly, but I tried not to show weakness. The bill, as I said, is canceled. You can stay and finish your dinner or leave, whichever you prefer. I'm going home. Prudence. Indela stood up as well. You can't just leave in the middle of a conversation. We're not done. Oh, I think we are done. I looked her straight in the eye. You've said everything you wanted to say, and so have I. Fenton looked lost. Mom, please don't go like this. Let's talk. Let's discuss everything. I'm sure we can find common ground. We've been talking for years, Fenton, I said tiredly. And nothing has changed. Because talk without action is just words carried by the wind. I turned to leave, but Fenton grabbed my arm. Wait, I'll walk you home. I saw Indela tense up, clearly unhappy with the offer. But to my surprise, she remained silent. There's no need. I gently released my hand. I know the way. I insist. Fenton was unusually determined. Indela, do you mind? I'll see my mother off and come back. Of course. Her smile was as tight as a string. Family comes first. I almost laughed at this sudden change. Family comes first. The phrase came out of her mouth like a sneer. Fenton threw on his jacket, and we walked out of the restaurant into the cool September evening. We walked in silence for a while. I sensed that my son wanted to say something, but didn't know where to begin. It's a beautiful evening, he said at last, looking up at the sky where the first stars had already appeared. Yes, I agreed. Fall is warm this year. There was silence again. I wasn't going to make it easy for him. If he wanted to talk, let him find the words himself. Mother, Fenton finally began, I really didn't know you bought the restaurant. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have listened? I asked him straight out. Or would you have dismissed it as just another old woman's quirk? He didn't answer, and that silence was more eloquent than any words. I thought you just exist, he said at last. Living a little, reminiscing about the past. Like most people your age. Like most people my age, I repeated. Fenton, you have no idea what people my age are capable of. How many interesting things they do. How many new things they learn. Age isn't a judgment, it's just a number. I understand, he nodded, But I could see he didn't. Not completely. And I'm proud of you. I really am. Buying a restaurant, making it a success, that's impressive. It's not about pride, Fenton, I sighed. It's about respect. It's about seeing me as a person, not an old mother who needs to be reminded occasionally out of a sense of duty. We approached my house. There were no lights in the windows. I hadn't had time to set the timer before I left. The house looked empty and lonely, just as I'd felt all these years. Do you want to come in? I asked, even though I knew the answer. Not tonight. He shook his head. Indela is waiting. But I'll stop by the other day, I promise. We'll talk. We'll discuss everything. Of course, I nodded, not believing a word of it. How many times had I heard those promises? How many times had he said he'd stop by, call, visit, and he hadn't? Mom? Fenton looked guilty. I know I haven't been the best son lately, but I really want to make things right. Why? I asked bluntly. Why now, Fenton? Because you found out I own a successful restaurant? Because I'm suddenly worthy of your circle? No. He seemed genuinely indignant. How can you think that? You're my mother. And you're my son, I replied. But that didn't stop you from ignoring me for years, letting your wife humiliate me, shaming me in front of your status friends. I was never ashamed of you, he started, but I raised my hand, stopping him. Please, no lies. Not today. I'm too tired for this. I opened the door and walked into the house, leaving Fenton on the doorstep. He looked confused, not knowing whether to go or stay. Good night, Fenton, I said, closing the door. Say hello to Indela. I didn't wait for him to answer. I closed the door, leaned back against it, and finally let myself breathe out. The tension I'd been holding in all evening was coming out, and I felt tears streaming down my cheeks. Without turning on the light, I went into the living room and sank into a chair. In the darkness, the house seemed even emptier than usual. I thought about what had just happened, about the words that had been said, about the truth that had finally come out. The truth was painful, but there was also relief in it. No more pretending that everything was okay. No longer did I have to pretend I wasn't hurt by my son's neglect and my daughter-in-law's scorn. All the cards were revealed, all the masks removed. I sat in the dark, remembering the look on Indela's face when she found out I owned the restaurant. The shock, the disbelief, and then that fake smile, that sudden attempt at rapport. It was as if my status had suddenly changed in her eyes, as if I was suddenly worthy of her attention. And Fenton, his confusion, his attempts to apologize without real remorse, his promises that neither he nor I believed in anymore. He was a good boy once, kind and sensitive. What happened to him? When did he turn into this insecure man who lets his wife dictate who he socializes with and how he lives his life? Maybe it's my fault. Maybe Douglas and I spoiled him too much, protected him too much from hardship, didn't teach him to stand up for himself and fight for what was right. Or maybe it was Indela, her manipulative skills, her ambition that had sucked Fenton in like a funnel sucking up a leaf. I wiped the tears away. What did it matter now what the cause was? What mattered was that my son had made a choice, and that choice was not in my favor. He will never take my side against Indela, never protect me from her taunts and scorn. He will continue to maneuver between us, trying to please both, but always choosing her in the end. And I have to accept that. I have to accept that my son is an adult who decides for himself how he wants to live his life and who he wants to associate with, even if his decisions hurt me. I got up from the chair and turned on the light. The house immediately felt more familiar, more cozy. My home. My space where I can be myself, where I don't have to pretend and conform to someone else's expectations. I went to my phone and saw that there was already a message from Fenton. Mom, I'm really sorry about tonight. Let's meet tomorrow and talk things over. I'll pick you up at 2. I didn't reply. I'd be busy at the restaurant tomorrow. Friday was a busy day, and I needed to check supplies, get ready for the weekend. Or maybe I just didn't want another conversation, another empty promise. I needed time to think, to decide what to do next. Continue this toxic relationship, hoping for a change that would likely never happen? Or muster up the courage to end it, to let my son live his life and myself live mine? I walked to the window and looked outside. Fenton was gone. He must have gone back to the restaurant to see Indela. I wondered what they were talking about. Was she scolding me for ruining the evening? Was he consoling her, promising that it wouldn't happen again? It was quiet outside, only the streetlights illuminating the deserted road. I remembered how long ago Douglas and I had walked down that street in the evenings, holding hands and dreaming of the future. How our son would grow up, how we would grow old together, how we would nurse our grandchildren. The reality was very different. Douglas was gone before we could grow old together. Fenton didn't grow up the way we dreamed. And it looked like I wouldn't be seeing any grandchildren. Indela had made it clear that children were not in their immediate plans. But this reality had its joys, its triumphs. I found the strength to start a new life after my husband's death. I created a successful business, gained the respect of the people who worked with me. It may not have been the future Douglas and I had dreamed of, but it was my future. And there was a lot of good in it. I stepped away from the window and headed for the bedroom. Tomorrow would be a new day. A day when I would have to make a big decision. To continue clinging to the illusion of a family relationship, or to find the courage to let go. I took off my dress, hung it carefully in the closet. I undid my necklace and put it in my jewelry box. I washed off my makeup, brushed my hair. The usual evening ritual I'd performed thousands of times. But tonight it felt different. More meaningful. More final. As I lay in bed, I thought about what it meant to be a mother. Of unconditional love, of sacrifice, of hope and disappointment. I loved Fenton from the moment I knew he existed. Loved him when he was a helpless infant. Loved him when he was a naughty teenager. Loved him when he became a grown man who forgot his way back to his parents' home. But love shouldn't mean self-deprecation. It shouldn't mean allowing him and his wife to treat me without respect, without consideration, without basic human kindness. I closed my eyes, feeling the fatigue finally taking its toll. Tomorrow I would make a decision. A decision that will probably change my life and the life of my son. But today, I just wanted to rest. The morning greeted me with sunlight streaming through the curtains. I woke up with a clear head and a clear understanding of what needed to be done. Toxic relationships, even with loved ones, are not worth clinging to. For the sake of my own peace of mind, for the sake of my self-respect, I had to end this vicious cycle of humiliation and disappointment. Fenton called several times, but I didn't answer. I needed time to gather my thoughts to formulate what I wanted to say to him. Not in anger, not in resentment, but with a clear understanding of the situation and my decision. Finally, I picked up my phone and dialed a message. Fenton, we need to talk. But not today. I'll get back to you when I'm ready. The reply came almost instantly. Mom, please let's meet. I want to make things right. I shook my head. Fix it. As if it was just a small mistake that could be erased with an eraser. As if years of neglect could be made up for with one conversation, one apology. Not everything can be fixed, Fenton. Sometimes you can only accept and move on. I'll get back to you when I'm ready to talk. I put the phone away and walked to the window. A new day, a new life. A life where I would value myself enough to not let anyone, even the people closest to me, treat me without respect. March in Coralville has always been a month of contrasts. Frosty mornings were followed by warm afternoons, and gusty winds brought rain or sunshine. I loved this fickleness, this uncertainty of nature that was so reminiscent of human life. 6 months had passed since that memorable evening at the old Maple. 6 months of a new life, a life without pretense, without painful expectations, without disappointment. A life in which I finally allowed myself to be me, without looking back at other people's evaluations and expectations. That morning I walked to work down a street strewn with the first spring flowers. Crocuses poked through the still thawing ground, their bright purple and yellow heads nodding in the wind as if to greet passers-by. I noticed that I was smiling, just for no reason. This habit of smiling had come back to me recently, after years when it was just a polite mask. The restaurant greeted me with the usual morning bustle. Suppliers were unloading fresh produce. Elias was already in the kitchen experimenting with a new sauce for the spring menu, and Raymond was going over yesterday's reports. Good morning, Mrs. Edmunds, Raymond greeted me with a smile. We have great news. Reservations for tonight are full, and for tomorrow too. And Local Kitchen magazine wants to do a feature on us. Great, I nodded, taking off my coat. When do they want to come? Next Tuesday, if that's convenient for you. They want to talk to you in person. They seem to be interested in the story of how a woman of, at your age, he hesitated a bit, running a successful restaurant. You can be blunt, Raymond, I grinned. A story about an old lady at 68 not sitting in a rocking chair, but running a business. I think it might be interesting. Raymond smiled with relief. He'd always been afraid to hurt my feelings at the mention of age, though I'd never hidden my years or tried to appear younger. That's right, he nodded. I think this article will attract new visitors, and maybe inspire other people not to be afraid to start something new at any age. Agreed. I headed toward my office. Confirm the meeting for Tuesday. Now let's look at those reports you've been studying. The day flew by in the usual routine, checking the quality of the food, discussing new menu items with Elias, meeting with a potential supplier of organic vegetables. In the last few months, I've been fully immersed in my work, and it's brought me real satisfaction. Old Maple has flourished, attracting more and more visitors not only from Coralville, but also from neighboring towns. In the evening, when the restaurant was filled with guests, I went out into the hall, as I had done so often lately. I loved watching the diners, seeing their reactions to the food, hearing their conversations and laughter. It was my little world that I had created on my own, and in which I felt truly needed. Prudence, a familiar voice called out to me. I thought I would find you here. I turned around and saw Donald Avery, the owner of the bookstore on the next street. We had met about 3 months ago when he first came to the Old Maple for a literary evening we had organized in conjunction with the city library. Donald, I smiled, really happy to see him. I wasn't expecting you today. I finished my inventory earlier than I had planned and decided I deserved a nice dinner, he smiled back. Is there a table for one? Always for you, I nodded to Kira, who was already walking toward us with a menu in hand. Could you put Mr. Avery at the table by the window, please? Of course, Mrs. Edmunds, Kira smiled. Please follow me, Mr. Avery. Will you join me? Donald asked, not moving from his seat. If you're not too busy, of course. I hesitated for a moment. I'd rarely dined in my own restaurant as a guest before, preferring to stay in the shadows. But lately I've been allowing myself more freedom, more pleasure. It would be my pleasure, I replied, and we followed Kira to a cozy table by the window. Donald was a pleasant conversationalist, readable, with a subtle sense of humor, as good at listening as he was at telling. He was 65, widowed 10 years ago, and like me, found solace in his work. His bookstore was not just a business but a true passion, a place where he could share his love of literature with others. I hear you're planning another literary evening, he said as we were brought dessert, wild berry cheesecake, Elias's specialty. Yes, next month, I nodded. The theme is springtime in literature. I hope you'll provide books for the exhibit again. I'd love to, he smiled. And maybe this time I can read an excerpt? I have a few ideas. Of course. I was pleased with his enthusiasm. I always appreciate your literary taste. We talked until almost closing time. As the last customers began to leave, Donald looked at his watch and smiled guiltily. I'm sorry. I didn't realize how much time had passed. I must have held you up. That's okay. I shook my head. It was nice to talk. He walked me home as he had done several times over the past few months. We walked slowly, enjoying the cool evening air and the conversation. I caught myself thinking that it had been a long time since I'd felt so at ease with someone other than Douglas. At the door of my house, Donald stopped. Thank you for a lovely evening, Prudence. Yeah, I was wondering, maybe this weekend we could go to the museum. There's a new Impressionist exhibit there. I smiled, feeling slightly excited. I'd love to, Donald. Saturday? Saturday's perfect. He brightened. I'll pick you up at 2? I'll be waiting. I nodded, and he bowed slightly, said goodbye, and headed toward his house, which was only a few blocks from mine. As I entered the house, I felt a strange warmth inside. Not a romantic infatuation. Donald and I were too old for that, had been through too much. But something soft and light, something like a new friendship that could possibly become something more. I checked my phone before bed and saw a missed call from Fenton. He'd called me about once a month since that memorable evening. Sometimes I answered and we exchanged short, formal phrases. Sometimes I ignored his calls, not feeling up to another awkward conversation. Our relationship had changed dramatically. I no longer expected attention from him, no longer hoped that he would suddenly become a caring son. I accepted reality as it was, and it brought me unexpected relief. At the same time, I didn't hold a grudge against him. Fenton was who he was, a product of his upbringing, his environment, his decisions. I loved him, but that love was no longer blind and forgiving. It was more mature, more deliberate. I decided not to call him back today. If it's something important, he'll call again or text. And if it's not, well, so be it. Saturday was clear and warm, as if it were made for the museum. I wore the light blue dress I'd bought a while ago, not too dressy, but elegant and appropriate for the occasion. I put my hair in a simple but neat style and applied light makeup. Looking in the mirror, I noted that I looked happy. Not young, no. The years had not gone away, but lively, energetic, with a sparkle in my eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time. Donald arrived at 2 o'clock sharp, with a bouquet of wildflowers. "They remind me of you," he said, a little embarrassed. "Simple but beautiful." I accepted the flowers gratefully, touched by his attention. Douglas, too, often gave me flowers. Not expensive roses or exotic orchids, but flowers like these. Wildflowers, garden flowers, sometimes picked from our own plot of land. "Why buy what nature gives for free?" he used to say. We had a great time at the museum. The exhibition was small but well chosen, with works by Monet, Renoir, Degas. We went from painting to painting, discussing the technique, the colors, the stories behind each canvas. "You know Fenton loved the Impressionists when he was a kid," I said, looking at Monet's water lilies. "We were in France when he was 14, and he could stand in front of those paintings for hours." "Is Fenton your son?" Donald asked. I rarely talked about my family, and he, being a tactful man, didn't ask. "Yes," I nodded. "My only child." "Are you close?" he asked cautiously. I hesitated for a moment, searching for words. "In a complicated relationship. The last few years have been difficult." Donald nodded understandingly, not needing further explanation. Another trait I valued in him was his ability not to push, not to demand more than he was willing to give. After the museum, we went to a small cafe on the corner, where we drank tea and shared our impressions of the exhibition. The conversation flowed smoothly from art to books, from books to music, from music to travel. It was easy with Donald. No tension, no need to appear to be someone I'm not. By the time we got back to my house, it was early evening. Donald stopped at the gate. "Thank you for a wonderful day, Prudence. I haven't had such a good time in a long time." "Neither have I replied sincerely. "Thank you for inviting me." He hesitated for a moment, then took my hand gently and shook it lightly. "I'll see you at the restaurant?" "See you at the restaurant," I smiled, feeling the slight warmth of his touch. When I entered the house, I saw an envelope on the doorstep. Someone had slipped it under the door while I was away. I picked it up and recognized Fenton's handwriting. Neat, with a slight slant to the right, so similar to Douglas's. I opened the envelope and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Mom, I know our relationship isn't at its best right now, and I understand why. I haven't been the best son these past years. Allowed things to happen that shouldn't have happened. Not protecting you when I should have. I want to fix that. I want us to be a family again. Indela and I are planning a small dinner for close friends next Friday night, 7 p.m. There will be people from my company and from the city administration. Important people who could be good for your business. Please come. It would mean a lot to me. It would mean a lot to Indela, too. She feels guilty about that night at the restaurant, and she wants to make things right. Let me know if you can come. Love, Fenton." I reread the letter several times, trying to figure out what I was feeling. Anger? Disappointment? Hope? None of those things. Just fatigue from this endless game of family that we hadn't had in a long time. Important people who could be good for your business. Fenton still didn't understand. Still thought I was interested in status, connections, that I was seeking to impress people in their circle. He didn't see that I had long ago found my own way, my own circle, where I was valued not for connections or status, but for who I was. And Indela, she feels guilty. Really? Or has she just accepted the fact that I'm now a person of status too, the owner of a successful business and a force to be reckoned with? I put the letter aside and walked to the window. Evening Coralville stretched out before me, quiet and cozy. Somewhere out there was Fenton and Indela's house, a big one, in the right neighborhood with the right neighbors. A house where there was no room for me, not the real me, but just the version of me that fit their ideas of what a mother of a successful person should be. And I suddenly realized that I didn't want to be a part of that world anymore. I don't want to pretend, to smile at dinner parties, to make small talk with people who don't care about me. I don't want to see Indela's fake smile, her condescending gaze, hear her comments full of hidden quips. I took a blank sheet of paper and wrote back, "Dear Fenton, thank you for the invitation, but I must decline. I have an important meeting on Friday that I cannot cancel. I appreciate your desire to mend the relationship, but I think we both need to face the truth. You and I have become two different people, with different values and outlooks on life. You've chosen your path, and I respect that choice. But it's not my way. I will always love you. You are my only son, a part of me. But I will no longer try to fit into your life, to pretend to be someone I'm not, for the approval of your wife or your friends. If you ever want to see me, just me, no expectations, no conditions, I'll always be happy to. My doors are open to you, but only for the real you, not the version Indela created. Take care of yourself." Mom? I sealed the letter in an envelope, wrote Fenton's name, and decided to take it tomorrow. Not to their house. I wasn't ready to meet Indela, but to Fenton's office. I'd leave it at the front desk and have them deliver it. Strangely, I didn't feel bitter, but relieved. It was as if I'd lost a weight I'd been carrying for too long. The weight of unfulfilled hopes, of disappointment, of constantly trying to live up to other people's expectations. I was free, free to live my life according to my own rules, free to enjoy my accomplishments, my friends, my hobbies, free to be myself, Prudence Edmunds, a 68-year-old woman who found the courage to start over after losing her husband, who built a successful business at an age when many retire, who had learned to value herself enough to not let anyone treat her without respect. The following days were filled with the usual concerns: running the restaurant, meeting with reporters from the local kitchen, preparing for a literary evening. Donald stopped by almost every day, sometimes for dinner, sometimes just to have tea in between. Our friendship developed slowly but surely, no rush, no pressure. On Friday, the day Fenton and Indela had dinner plans, I worked late. Not because I had nowhere to go. Donald had invited me to a concert in the city park. But we did have an important delivery that needed to be checked out in person. When I finally finished the paperwork and left the office, the restaurant was already full of customers. I walked through the room, nodding to familiar faces, exchanging brief greetings with regulars. At the very exit, I met Elias, who had just finished his shift. "Leaving, Mrs. Edmunds?" he asked, holding the door for me. "Have a good weekend." "Thank you, Elias," I smiled. "You too. By the way, the new menu is great, especially that goat cheese and pear salad." He brightened at the compliment. "I'm glad you liked it. I experimented with different varieties of pears before I chose that one." We walked outside where a warm spring evening greeted us. Elias said goodbye and headed to his car, and I stayed standing at the entrance, breathing in the fresh air and savoring the moment. I thought of Fenton and Indela, who were probably hosting guests in their perfect home right now. I wondered if they were expecting me, despite my response. Had they talked about me, explaining my absence? Or did they just pretend that everything was going according to plan? I was a little sad at the thought that my only son had become almost a stranger. But that sadness was light, without bitterness. I had done everything I could to be a good mother. If that wasn't enough, well, so be it. I decided to walk home, enjoying the cool of the evening. Tomorrow was Saturday, the day I would meet Donald. We planned to go to his bookstore, where he promised to show me the rare editions he had just received. As I walked past the city park, I heard the sounds of music. The very concert Donald had invited me to was starting. I stopped for a moment, listening to the melody. Classical Vivaldi, if I wasn't mistaken. Seasons. Spring. I smiled and continued on my way. Spring is a time of renewal, a time of new beginnings, a time when nature wakes up after a long winter, ready to bloom again. Maybe my life was also entering a new spring? Not as exuberant and bright as in my youth, but beautiful in its own way, with its quiet wisdom, with self acceptance, with the ability to appreciate every moment. At home, I made myself some tea and sat by the window, looking out at the thickening twilight. On the table was the book I had started reading on Donald's recommendation, a novel about a woman who, at an advanced age, traveled the world to find herself. I opened it to a laid-back page and began reading, feeling a strange kinship with the main character. My phone vibrated. There was a text from Donald. "The concert is wonderful, but it's not as interesting without you. Meet me tomorrow at 11?" I smiled and replied, "Absolutely. I look forward to it." Putting my phone on charge, I noticed there was another unread message from Fenton. "Mom, we were expecting you today, despite your letter. Sorry you didn't come. Indela made your favorite dish. Maybe another time." I did not bother to reply. What could I say? That I didn't remember Indela ever being interested in my culinary preferences? That I didn't believe in the sincerity of this invitation? That I was tired of trying to be a part of their lives on their terms? No, it was better to remain silent. Let Fenton think what he wanted. Let him live his life and I'll live mine. And if someday our paths crossed again, truly, without falsehood or pretense, I would be glad. And if not, well, I've learned to find happiness without it. I closed the book and walked to the mirror in the hallway. A woman with gray hair, with wrinkles around her eyes, with a slight weariness in her gaze looked back at me, but also with dignity, with confidence, with an inner calm that had not been there before. I smiled at my reflection. Life went on, and it was good. Not perfect. It had losses, disappointments, difficulties. But it also had joys, achievements, new encounters, and discoveries. And most importantly, I was finally free. Free from expectations, from the fear of disappointment, from the constant need for approval. Free to be myself, to live by my own rules, to love those who love me as I am. After all, isn't that what life is all about? Not status, not connections, not social approval, but in the opportunity to live my own life, unique, imperfect, but my own. I turned away from the mirror and headed for the bedroom. Tomorrow would be a new day, a day full of opportunities, meetings, small joys. And I was ready to face it with an open heart, with gratitude for all that I had, and with hope for what was yet to be learned and experienced.